Emmerdale spoilers for Thursday, July 17 tease that Kim is in grave danger as dark forces close in on her closest ally, Jo. The sun rises over the village with the usual promise of normalcy and warmth, but beneath the placid surface lies danger. Crowley, whose ambition has long since outpaced his conscience, tightens his grip on Jo, squeezing every last shred of loyalty and hope from him. Jo, torn between the woman he loves and the man who holds his destiny in his hands, is at a crossroads from which there may be no turning back. From the moment Crowley first approached Jo with veiled threats and promises of protection, a shadow fell across the young man's heart. At first, he believed himself immune to the criminal underworld's reach, certain that his quiet life with Dawn in Emmerdale offered a shield too strong to penetrate. But Crowley's reach proved longer, his tactics more insidious than Jo could have imagined. With ruthless efficiency, Crowley seized every penny Jo had managed to save, then threatened violence against Jo's nearest and dearest. Jo's world, once so simple and secure, crumbled under the weight of blackmail. Kim Tate has always been a shrewd player on the property and investment fields. Decades in business taught her to recognize opportunity and risk in equal measure, to balance profit against prudence. When Jo approached her with Crowley's investment contract, his hands trembling with fear and desperation, Kim sensed immediately that something was amiss. The contract bore all the hallmarks of high returns and low risk, a tempting offer on paper, but impossible in practice. She recognized the subtle clauses that shifted liability onto the investor, the hidden penalties, and the impossible deadlines for depositing funds. Kim's instinct screamed that this was no legitimate opportunity, but a trap disguised in glossy corporate language. Jo's confession came in the dead of night, in the cramped living room he shared with Dawn. His voice cracked as he recounted the story. Crowley's initial plan had been to defraud Kim of her life savings by forging her signature on the investment contract. When that failed, Kim, guided by years of business acumen, had refused to sign. A new, darker strategy emerged. Crowley himself had concocted a sinister drug, designed to sedate Kim long enough for his henchmen to kidnap her, force her to an isolated warehouse, and coerce her into signing. Jo's role was clear. He was to lure Kim to a precise address, where the abduction would take place. The realization struck Jo like a physical blow. He replayed every conversation with Crowley, every demand for his compliance, every threat he had tried to brush aside. It was impossible now to pretend ignorance. Crowley had escalated his tactics, and there was no turning back. Jo felt shame for allowing himself to be manipulated, fear for Kim's safety, guilt toward Dawn, who deserved honesty and peace. Yet above all, he feared Crowley's promise of vengeance should he fail. It was only by feigning compliance that he bought himself time. Dawn's reaction was a mixture of shock and steely determination. When Jo revealed the truth, the blackmail, the abduction plot, the fake investment, she recoiled at first, tears welling in her eyes. But then she recognized that this was no time for recrimination. Kim's life hung in the balance, and Crowley's cruelty knew no bounds. Dawn's own past struggles, her resilience in the face of adversity, kicked in. She refused to watch another innocent suffer, because Jo had once tried to shoulder the burden alone. Together, they resolved to construct a ruse so elaborate that even Crowley's hardened mind would falter. They began by planting seeds of doubt in Crowley's network. Dawn, feigning resentment toward Jo's betrayal, spoke loudly and emotionally on the telephone when one of Crowley's men called to confirm Jo's cooperation. She let her voice waver as though overwhelmed by anger, dropping hints that Jo intended to double-cross Crowley and disappear entirely with Kim's money. Every whispered conversation, every scented letter and text message, built a web of misinformation that would, they hoped, draw Crowley into believing his scheme was airtight. Kim, unaware of the full extent of the conspiracy, agreed to meet Jo at the address he had been coerced to use, certain only that something was off. On the eve of the supposed transaction, Emmerdale's rolling fields lay tranquil under a silvery moon. Kim arrived at the designated meeting point, a dilapidated farmhouse at the edge of the moor, wearing her trademark silk blouse and tailored trousers, a picture of calm competence. Unbeknownst to her, Joe's hands shook as he approached, glancing nervously at the old barn door marked with a peeling sign that read simply "Office." The air was thick with tension, every rustle of a hedgehog in the underbrush, every distant hoot of an owl, seemed amplified by the dread in Joe's heart. Inside the barn, the plan had been set into motion. Crowley's men, 3 hulking figures in hooded sweatshirts, watched from the shadows, arms folded, waiting for their moment. Their phones were set to record every second, to capture Kim's signature and her face as she signed away her assets. Nearby, a motley collection of vials and syringes lay ready, Crowley's sedative drug, potent enough to render Kim unconscious for hours without causing permanent harm. Should she resist, they had orders to use more drastic measures. But Joe and Dawn had another actor in their play. D.S. Priya Sharma, a detective from the local constabulary, who had grown suspicious of Crowley's activities following a series of unexplained bank withdrawals and property transfer anomalies. Working in secret, Priya had coordinated with Joe and Dawn, ready to swoop in the moment the confession and recordings were in hand. An unmarked police van idled beyond the tree line, its engine silent, lights dimmed to avoid detection. In Priya's earpiece, she listened for Joe's signal. As Joe guided Kim toward an old wooden table, her eyes narrowed. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" she asked quietly, her tone betraying neither anger nor fear but cool command. Joe's throat tightened. He gestured to the stack of paperwork. "It's just the last signature, Kim. Then you'll have full details. I swear I'm doing this with your best interests at heart." Kim paused, fingertips hovering above the pen. She studied Joe's ashen face, the tremor in his hand, the tension in his shoulders. Something didn't add up. At that moment, Joe gave the code phrase into his watch microphone, "The harvest moon shines bright." Across the moor, Priya's hand tightened around the radio mic copy, D.S. Sharma. "Moving in." She slipped from the van, signaling 2 uniformed officers to flank her. The world seemed to hold its breath. Inside the barn, Kim pressed pen to paper. She moved deliberately, sealing her fate, or so she thought. The camera rigged above her recorded the signature, in crystal clarity, capturing every loop and flourish. A faint hiss sounded in the rafters as the sedative mist spritzed from a hidden dispenser. Kim's vision blurred. She blinked, trying to focus. Joe reached forward and steadied her elbow. "Just relax," he whispered, though his voice trembled. But Kim's instincts were sharper than any chemical ploy. Her years of high-stakes negotiation had taught her that deals too good to be true almost always concealed danger. As the drug took effect, she clamped down on her pen, letting the varnish of authority slip away. With a sudden move, she flung her arm to the side, sending the ink bottle sloshing across the table. It shattered on the floor. The crude label, "Property Investment, Low Risk, High Return," floated away in a pool of purple ink. The hidden camera's lens caught every moment, Kim's defiance, Joe's horror, the henchman's surprise. Dawn, lurking outside a cracked window, gave Priya a thumbs up. Within seconds, uniformed officers burst through the barn doors, their torches slicing through the darkness. Shouts of "Police!" echoed off the rafters. Crowley's men sprang forward, but 2 officers tackled the nearest thug to the ground. The other 2 attempted to flee, one was cornered by Priya and cuffed in mere heartbeats. Joe sank to his knees, relief and dread warring in his chest. Kim, still reeling from the sedative's after effects, blinked at the sight of blue uniforms. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a flicker of fury as she realized how close she came to disaster. She shot a look at Joe, betrayal and gratitude intertwined in its depths. He met her gaze, tears glistening on his cheeks. Dawn raced inside, wrapping her arms around Joe, then slipping an arm around Kim's shoulders to steady her. In the mayhem, Crowley himself remained conspicuously absent. The barn's back door stood ajar, the wind catching it with a mournful groan. D.S. Sharma's radio crackled. Crowley evaded capture. He's gone. Kim's heart thudded. The mastermind behind the plot, the man who had dogged Joe's steps and threatened their families, had slipped free once again. Night fell fully as the police led Joe, Dawn, and Kim out of the barn under the watchful eyes of street lamps and patrol car lights. The ordeal had ended, but the danger was far from over. Crowley, wounded in pride if not physically, would come for them again. His hunger for power and money was insatiable, his capacity for cruelty undiminished. And Kim, though shaken, vowed silently that she would not remain a victim in his narrative. In Joe's arms, Dawn whispered promises of safety and love, but the tremor in his body spoke of a man forever changed. Kim, pressing into Dawn's side, felt a surge of protective fury. Somewhere, out in the dark, Crowley plotted his next move. And as the trio stood together on the barn steps, the moonlight cast long shadows behind them, shadows that stretched not only across the yard, but into the days and weeks to come. Their alliance had triumphed tonight, but in Emmerdale, the quiet moments are often the calm before the storm. The moon had scarcely set by the time Emmerdale's fields began to stir with the first light of dawn, but the barn's shadow still clung to Joe's mind as he sat on the edge of his bed. Dawn slept fitfully beside him, the events of the previous night replaying in her dreams. Kim's face etched with betrayal, Crowley's stark absence, and the echo of police radios fading into the darkness. Joe pressed a hand to his temple, trying to banish the headache that throbbed where panic had made its home. It was Kim who broke the silence first. Dawn had slipped out to fetch coffee, and Joe lay staring at the ceiling when Kim knocked softly on the door frame. She wore a simple white shirt and dark jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her eyes were tired, the faintest shadow of a bruise beneath her left eye marking where a stray blow might have landed during her capture attempt. "Mind if I come in?" she asked quietly. Joe swung his legs off the bed and stood. "Of course. I've been meaning to apologize, Kim. I should have told you sooner. I should have protected you better." Kim sat on the chair by the small wooden desk. She accepted the coffee Dawn held out, wrapping both hands around the warm mug. "Joe, you saved me. You risked everything. Crowley doesn't deserve another word from me." Her voice was steady, though Joe could see the tremor in her fingers. He sank into the bed, leaning forward. He slipped away. "Priya says they'll track him eventually, but..." Kim set the mug on the desk. "He'll be careful. He knows this part of the world. He'll keep moving until we find a way to corner him." She paused. "But we can't wait for him to make the next move." Her gaze came back to Joe's. "We have to strike first." Across the village, in the temporary safe house D.S. Priya Sharma had arranged, the detective pored over her notes once more. The map of England was spread across the table, yellow pushpins marking Crowley's last known sightings. His network was fractured but far from broken. He still had contacts in Manchester, Leeds, and perhaps even as far afield as Birmingham. Priya traced her finger along the railway lines and motorways, calculating his most likely escape route. She knew that every hour he spent untethered was another hour he could mount a fresh assault on Kim and anyone who had dared defy him. A soft knock brought her back to the present. Dawn slipped into the room, her eyes red but resolute. "He's awake," she said. "Kim's downstairs, talking to Joe." Priya nodded. "Good. We need to finalize the plan. Once he's back here, healthy enough to move, we'll extract him to a secure location. Then we'll use him as bait to draw Crowley out. Dawn bit her lip. Are we ready for that? I don't know if Joe can handle it, if any of us can. She glanced at the wall where Kim's name and face were pinned above a string of leads. I'm terrified, Priya. The detective set aside her pen and offered a firm smile. Fear keeps us alive, Dawn. But we turn it into purpose. We'll do this together. Morning light filtered through the curtains when Joe rejoined Kim and Dawn in the farmhouse kitchen. The three of them gathered around a battered oak table, mugs in hand. Dawn spread out the crumpled remains of Crowley's investment agreement, scrawled with Kim's aborted signature. Kim tapped her fingernail thoughtfully against the paper. That document is worthless now, Kim said. He'll need a new contract. Something even more convincing. She looked at Joe. He'll come to you again. Joe's jaw tightened. I won't let him. Not again. Kim leaned back, folding her arms. He's got resources we don't. Men, money, influence. He won't stop until he's either took everything or I'm dead. She met Dawn's eyes. And because of what happened last night, he knows you two have his number. He'll target you next if he thinks that's the easiest route. Dawn's hand flew to her chest. But we can't sit here and wait. I've contacted the press, anonymously, for background stories on Crowley's finances. If we can expose him publicly, we might dismantle his empire from the outside in. Priya entered then, followed by two officers carrying a metal briefcase. Time's up, she announced. We need to move Joe to a holding cell in Halifax for his safety. He'll give his statement tomorrow. Meanwhile, Kim, you're being offered police protection, not just a detail, but a safe house outside the county. By midday, they were on the road, driving north into Yorkshire. Joe sat in the back of a marked police car, Dawn beside him, Kim in the front with Priya. The rural lanes gave way to rolling moors as they ascended into the hills. The safe house was a converted shepherd's cottage, remote enough that only the faintest wisp of cell service reached its walls. Inside, Kim immediately claimed the living room as her temporary office. Dawn flopped onto the sofa, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Joe hovered by the window, staring out at the windswept grass. Dawn stirred. We'll get him, Joe. We've got enough to bring Crowley down, his fake companies, offshore accounts, witness statements. We just need that final push. Kim joined them. And that will come when he underestimates us. Crowley's arrogance is his weakness. She paused, looking out the rain-speckled window. But first, Joe, you need to rest. I have a few contacts in Leeds who owe me favors. I'll contact them to follow up on the financial trail. Over the next 2 days, the cottage turned into a hive of activity. Kim worked the phones relentlessly, speaking in clipped tones to accountants, solicitors, and former associates of Crowley's. Dawn uploaded leaked documents to a secure news outlet, ensuring the story would break in the morning headlines. Priya coordinated patrols around the cottage, positioned decoys to suggest their location had changed, and arranged for specialist tech teams to hack into Crowley's encrypted communications. Joe slept little. He spent hours with Priya, recounting every detail of his interactions with Crowley, phrases, times, even the brand of coffee they drank together. Priya recorded it all, hammering together a timeline that would become Exhibit A in Crowley's looming trial. Each time Joe finished a session, he felt the weight in his chest lighten, as though every confession was a chain snapped from around his soul. On the third evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the news story broke. The headline on Emmerdale's local paper read, "Property Tycoon's Dark Secrets Exposed. Crowley's Empire Built on Lies and Fear." Kim, Dawn, and Priya gathered in the modest sitting room, watching as the online comments flooded in, outrage, shock, and most importantly, calls for justice. Joe scrolled through the article on his phone, reading the details of Crowley's offshore holdings and the allegations from those he had coerced. They won't ignore this, Priya said, eyes gleaming. Pressure is mounting. We can expect him to show himself soon. A sudden knock at the door sent a jolt through them. Priya raised her hand. Stay behind me, she ordered. Through the spy hole, Kim saw a tall figure in a trench coat, hat pulled low. The man turned away, then back, his eyes assessing the window before he slipped around to the side of the cottage. Priya drew her pistol, moving stealthily to a side entrance. Kim grabbed Joe's arm, dragging him behind the sofa. Dawn slid to the floor, pressing her ear against the door. Footsteps approached. The latch clicked. The door swung inward on silent hinges. Crowley stood in the doorway, his face was a mask of controlled fury, but when his eyes settled on the trio, with Priya's weapon already trained on him, something in his expression cracked, revealing raw fear. In an instant, he bolted past Priya and lunged toward the window. The next moments were a blur, Priya firing a warning shot, Joe diving across the room to pull Dawn to safety, Kim grabbing a heavy candlestick and smashing it through the window to block his exit. Rain poured inside, the broken glass glinting like shards of ice. Crowley darted out into the darkness. Priya raced after him, commanding officers taking position on either side of the cottage. Kim and Dawn rushed to help Joe to his feet, both of them slipping on the wet floor. His escaping again, Dawn panted. Kim's gaze hardened. Then we chase. The chase that followed cut through the twilight moorlands. Priya's voice crackled through the radio as patrol cars converged on Crowley's fleeing silhouette. Joe and Dawn climbed into Priya's unmarked car, Kim at the wheel, tires spinning on the gravel track. They tracked him to an abandoned quarry, its cliffs glowing silver under the moonlight. Crowley stood at the edge, calculating his next move. Below, the water lay still, reflecting the stars. As the car screeched to a halt, Priya burst from the passenger door, weapon drawn. Kim and Dawn flanked her, Joe panting beside them. Crowley, it's over, Priya called. He turned, face drawn. You think you've won? You've ruined me. But mark my words. You'll pay for this. Kim stepped forward. It's you who will pay, once the court sees the truth. She gestured to Joe. Thank you for risking everything. You proved your loyalty where it counted. Crowley's eyes flicked between them, hatred burning bright. Then, with one last sneer, he turned and vanished down a narrow path, slipperily descending toward the water's edge. Priya and two officers pursued, their torches bobbing through the undergrowth. In Emmerdale, the calm always follows the storm, and sometimes, it hides the darkest secrets yet to come.